me, I've gone ahead and turned on the recording right now, so they're keeping track of this. Um, don't say anything you don't want College Board to know about. Although it does sound like I'm getting background noise from someone. Oh, good. Student teaching with an AP teacher already. That's wonderful. They rolled out the slightly new version of the exam last year, and they've made a couple of tweaks to the exam this year. But the AP Insight platform is designed to help support and provide resources you can use in the classroom, kind of kick in directly, or things that you can just look at to kind of supplement your own understanding as you go along of what students find difficult about the program of AP generally, or what they find specifically hard about doing the AP exam. It may help, and I would probably recommend to both of you that you pull open another browser window if you can, so that you can log in to the AP Insight program. Eileen, do you have login credentials for that? Okay, good. So that makes it quick and easy. There's a number of things that we'll have in the presentation here that are going to give you screenshots so you can kind of see what's going on. But if there are things you'd actually like to look at in more detail, it might be helpful to have your own window open. That's all. Uh, got you. Thank you for the warning about the Wi-Fi. And maybe I will just be so clear that you won't have any questions, and that won't be a problem. But then if you have any brilliant insights from the years teaching the course, we will definitely want to know that as well. The goal of this kind of PLC is to be collaborative as much as we can. So if there are things that you know about, or Eileen, not from like necessarily your extensive experience with the course, but anything that you saw while you were student teaching, or anything that you think will work smoothly or is a terrible idea, we'd like that sort of feedback as well. Remember always that if you have any feedback for the AP Insight program more generally, you can go to apinsight@collegeboard.org. That's their generic email address that will take any comments about this program, and they will get back to you very soon with that. They're pretty good about keeping track of it. So let's go here to their agenda slide. We're going to run through what the Insight program is, and I'll try to explain as we go along sort of how that fits with AP more generally, in case you'll find that helpful. And then they've given me like one particular content area out of the Insight program to sort of walk through, so you can see how it works in practice and what you can do with it in the classroom. And then we'll kind of have a little more open-ended conversation time if there are questions for us to answer, or if you have brilliant examples or ideas to share out, then that would be the right time to do that. This is me. They gave me my own slide. I'm John Deacon. I teach mostly sophomore AP World, but I also do the junior senior elective AP Economics. And then in the summers at the AP Reading, I've been a question leader or exam leader for the last few years, kind of helping organize the scoring. So I'm not designing the rubrics, but I am helping to put them into effect, and so it gives me a little bit of insight into how these things kind of function at the end of the year on the exam. If you have questions about that, you can let me know those. I'll be happy to integrate that in as we go along. Double check the notes they gave me if there's anything crucial that I have forgotten to add in. I think we're doing all right. Take a few moments to read over their takeaways, so I'm not just reading them to you off the screen. Serena, welcome back. I'm sorry, it seems maybe you got cut off or had to leave. We're just kind of walking through a little bit of what the presentation is for today. We haven't gone too far in. So on that focus question right there, we're trying to get a sense of what's the best kind of things or kind of approach to take with these Insight resources. So if you have questions like prior to that about what the resources are, if we're going too fast, just ask me to slow down and we can check into that. But the primary purpose today is not really to walk through those, but instead to see how you can use them. It's assuming kind of a basic level of knowledge, and so let me know if that's not accurate. What is the Insight program specifically? It's a collection of teaching tools and then also assessments for learning that are in themselves teaching tools. So you got a number of lessons or pieces of lessons that you can use, that you can give to students during class or as supplemental instructional pieces. You can't drop this whole program in as a set of lessons. That's not really what it's designed to do. It won't replace your teaching and planning, but what it will do is supplement. So if you have a whole lot already, you can fit this in as you're going along. If you don't have a whole lot already, then you can sort of build it in a more robust way. Whatever is going to be easiest in your classroom, that's sort of what we're going for. What they did was go back through the test results and the national exam results and try to figure out what was really difficult for students to accomplish and achieve on the exam. And then from that, they built this set of challenge areas, 10 of the most difficult combinations of content and skills, things that students find hard to do or that teachers find hard to teach, or both. And so your idea, Eileen, I see over in the chat, of planning your test or tests first and then plan the course. Yes, you absolutely can do that. The very best tool to use as a start point for that is the course and exam description from AP. If you just go to like apcentral.collegeboard.com and use their description and content outline for what is included in the AP exam, that's the set of information, the knowledge and skills that you would want to be building into your own unit exams. At least in my classroom, we do 6 big ones that match the 6 time periods of AP. As far as using AP Insight to make that work, then we're sort of asking which pieces of the course within your main units are really difficult for kids, and what can we do for that. So AP Insight provides some like quiz questions that you might want to build in, or that you might want to adopt directly onto your unit exam. That would be one way to use these kind of materials in the kind of way you're talking about. Serena, thank you. That's a helpful piece of information for me. So it looks like Amy's got some years of experience with it, but Eileen and Serena a little bit newer as far as this goes. And so I'll try to keep it at that level and do maybe a little more explanation of how the AP course works. Amy, if I'm going too slow for you, feel free to let me know that too. I can happily speed that back up. Let's see. The 4-part cycle. This is sort of the AP Insight model, but it's also just a basic teaching model. Like, plan what you're going to do, then teach it to students, then assess whether they learned it or not, and then you and the students go ahead and take action after the fact there. That cycle is sort of how the AP Insight webpage is set up, and each of the different kinds of resources that are available to you are kind of sorted into those 4 areas. They really want to emphasize at Insight that all 4 of these pieces are necessary. So it's possible that you might not use all the resources they give you, like you might be flooded out by way too many things to use at any given time, but you do want to be going through each one of those steps. So you're thinking of the year as a whole, and you're reading over the course to prepare, and then you're setting up some unit plans, and then you're laying out your tests like you just suggested, Eileen, and then after you do the tests, unit by unit, you're figuring out what students need to do still or learn still and come back. And then on a much smaller scale, Insight is designed to help you inside of any given unit, right, with any particular set of difficult challenge area kind of material. So your preparation materials that they provide you here include some pretty in-depth like explanations of what kids struggle with typically and what you should watch out for in any given piece of the content. And then teach resources include some lesson plans, and then multiple choice and short answer and free response long essays in the assess portion as well. So Serena, it's like you did take a PLC already, so like a welcome PLC, perfect. So you got a general idea. What we're doing here, I think I explained it while you were offline briefly, is we're going to do like a super short version of that PLC just to get everybody, make sure everybody's up to speed on that, and then we'll try to open it up for some more like sharing of how you would go about using these. I'm assuming that people are familiar with the language formative assessments and summative assessments. They're really all about the formative approach. The idea here is that you as a teacher are trying to gather information on what the students can and can't do and help them practice. So you're using the testing or assessment experience to help gain more information and help the students like leverage themselves into more impressive learning. The full cycle of prepare, teach, assess, act. If you take a few moments to just look at the bullet points under each one, those are the different kinds of things that are available to you in the Insight program. So there's some CA is challenge area, so you can unpack it and there's a guide to it, like what are the actual knowledge and skills that kids are finding difficult that we're working on in here. And then over on the teach side, there are some lesson plans and activities that they kind of collectively group as performance tasks. There's some self-monitoring progress sheets and some case studies. And then on the assess side, for me at least, these are the things that I use most often. There are some multiple choice quizzes that I use sometimes entirely, and sometimes I just use like a question here or there that I think is particularly helpful. And then there are also some longer essay and writing short answer questions, DBQs, that sort of thing. Those are designed to work together. If you have space to build the whole thing in, then you can do those BB, that is building block quizzes along the way, and then the whole challenge area all together with a bigger assessment. But there's no special reason you have to use all those resources. You can, of course, just build in bits and pieces as makes sense to you. The example that we're going to work with then, like within each one of those parts, let's just go ahead and take one example and talk a little bit about how you might incorporate that into your own class as you go. This causation skill is one of the absolutely crucial ones to my mind, and I'm not on the development committee, but to my mind, causation is like a thread that runs through all the others. If you're really going to do comparison well, then you have to explain why they're similar and why they're different. Like that's the kind of more sophisticated historical thinking that you would expect a real historian to do. Or if you're doing change over time, for example, then again, you're going to try to explain why is it changing, how is it changing, what are the factors that lead to that. So causation is something that's really important, and it's something that students struggle with, especially if they're new to AP. Then they're really having trouble explaining not just what happened, but how come it happened. So it took that particular thinking skill or reasoning skill, as the way they're kind of being phrased now, and then we're looking at the content of religious beliefs diffusing. And so if you're thinking about the curriculum framework for AP World, that means we can be talking about Jews or Zoroastrians or various polytheistic systems already in period 1. And then you move into the classical period and you got diffusion of major beliefs like Buddhism along the Silk Roads or Christianity around the Mediterranean. And then you move ahead to period 3, you'll be looking at spread of Islam. So this idea of religious beliefs diffusing through large areas is an important one that kids are going to have to hit over and over again. And that means that the building blocks can be one at a time, right? Jews and Zoroastrians, and then looking again at Christians, or looking at Buddhists, or looking at Muslims. And each of those would be a different building block within the larger challenge area about causation, diffusion of religious belief. So the first thing you want to do if you're thinking, well, which of these can I use, is track down what the building block is, what's it about, and where do you find that. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot from the Insight program. If you look up at the top there, you've got the home button and then strategies and your other tabs right along the top right there. If you go to the very first one, the strategies, then here's where you're going to find those different opening explanations like that will be helpful to you in your planning if you're trying to figure out what there is inside this challenge area. So if you click on it, you get this kind of document here. Thinking skill down the left side, thinking skill and content combined makes the challenge area. And then within that are the building blocks, which are labeled by letter A, B, C, D as you go through. And then bullet points over on the side. Now you have the particular details, the facts that are going to be related to that building block inside the curriculum framework. You can also get this document. So we have both a topic translation that translates the topics from the curriculum framework in, and then also this document, this roadmap, in case you're wondering, like, well, what are all the challenge areas all at once, and what are all the different building blocks, and how many are there that AP Insight has resources for, then you can look at it here. This is not like a mandatory set of documents. So these are supposed to be helpful in your planning. They can help you sort it into the places where you might want to use them, but it's also possible you might want to arrange it differently. Like some people don't teach in period-based units. Some people do more thematic stuff. Some people combine pieces of period. Like you can, of course, arrange it however you like. The idea here is that these blocks can be dropped in wherever they make most sense in your particular classroom and planning process. A comment from Amy that the topic translation does make it easy to identify which resources. That I find is one of my biggest troubles using all the resources, is that I don't know where to go, which one. I know there's something in there that I could use, but I don't know where it is. And so, Amy, I would say you're exactly right that's the place that's best for me to go back to, so that I can figure out where are the things that might be helpful to me. There's a comment in the prep notes that they gave me for right in here that says, don't start with a quiz, start with a plan. And I'm like, that's good advice for me. It's good advice for first year teachers. It's good advice for anybody. The idea is that you know where you're going, and then you can decide where those quizzes are going to be most helpful to you and the students. Definitely make sure that you're doing your in-class instruction before you try to use these quizzes. They'll give you a lot more useful feedback on how well the students are able to do these kinds of things if you're using them after they've had some instruction to then monitor how effectively did it get across, and do they need more practice. How does that work? So I don't know how familiar you are with the platform, if you've had a chance to get in and play around with it. So forgive me if I'm going too slow through these things. But when you go to your homepage, your dashboard, I think is the official term for it, for AP Insight World History, and you look at the Prepare, Teach, Assess, Act, the 4-part explanation, then there's a little green pull down arrow. If you hit that for select a challenge area, then it's got all 10 of them there. They're kind of sorted by the themes of world history, 2 challenge areas in each one, and then each one's hyperlinked so that you can get into the resources that are associated with that one. Amy, it seems, is way more organized than I am about setting up her classroom, which I really like. That's the kind of personal improvement goal that I'm working on. So what you have here is, so you make a note of when to teach the building block right on your pacing calendar, so that as you're planning out the unit, or you're planning out your semester, however you're going, like, where could you drop that? If that was a thing I sat down to do in August, that would make me a much better and happier person when it got along about October, November, and I'm starting to get slammed and I forget to get back in here. So absolutely, the more you can do to set that up, I think the better. If you're trying to follow along with our example, you can see the arrows that they've got set up here down there at causation, spread of knowledge. That's where the challenge area is. That's going to get us this religious belief thing. In preparation, if you already have a lot of experience teaching kids and you know where they're going to struggle, some of this stuff you can slide right by. But especially if it's your first or second time going through the course and you're not sure, what do students already know, or what do they find difficult on the test, that's where some of this misunderstanding stuff can be particularly helpful, because it goes through and explains, students often have difficulty doing this or that. So you're coming in here to unpack the challenge area, is what they call it. You pull that up and gets you all the details on what the challenge area is and why they picked it, and what were the particular details that they ran into that made them think, oh, this would be a good challenge area for practice. This graphic is kind of nice. It just has a neat way of summing up there in the circle what we've been talking about. So your challenge area combines thinking skill and some content material right there in the middle of the big circle. And then wrapped around it are these different building blocks in your little circles of here's a particular spot in the course where this shows up. Here's another place where kids are going to have to do this combination of knowledge and skills. And here's another. And so you get a chance to do each of those building blocks. Not necessarily in their entirety, right? But you're gonna pick and choose bits of each building block as you go through. And then after you've finished all the building blocks, or you reach a place where you think the kids are ready with that combination of knowledge and skills, then you can hit them with the more complex challenge area assessment. What is it that's difficult, right? That shows up in there. What's difficult for kids in the first place, and then what's difficult for you, right? What is it that teachers tend to have a tough time getting across? So they look not only at national exam results here, but they also did some surveys of existing teachers, and they also did some student surveys trying to get a broad-based picture of what it is that's hard. Here is the kind of image of the text-heavy, really dense explanation of every building block. So they're giving you a description of what the building block is in some exhaustive detail. And then you see this kind of zoom in. Here's your building block C, and then over on the right with those bullet points, here are some things that students may do. You know, it's not like every student does that, but it's something that tends to be tough. So what I like to do when I get a chance is look at that on the front end, so I can remind myself, here's some things that students maybe have trouble with, so that even if I'm like setting up maybe a lecture outline that I already have in class for a lesson, I know to be keeping these things front of mind as I go. And then on the flip side, when I'm picking up assessments and I'm trying to judge what kids know, I know to be looking for these things, or maybe adjust my test questions to kind of check for these things and figure out if that's something we can clear up. Because the more we can do now, before we hit the semester exam or before we hit the national exam, the better off the kids are going to be there. For each one of these, they've identified what they call success criteria. What are the things kids should be able to do, and what should I as a teacher be able to see from students that would show me that yes, they've got it. So each of the building block quizzes and the challenge area assessments are lined up to try to test for these success criteria. And then if you look at right next to the success criteria, you got these misunderstandings. Here's again some common things that kids will do instead of hitting it right that you can often find. If you go one step over from prepare and then you're actually involved in teaching them, here's where you're going to find performance tasks. Is this something you need to do? Well, if you already have a set of lessons that you're super happy with, you may not need to integrate very much of this kind of thing, as long as you've got some effective instruction. But double check through at least a couple of these and figure out, are these things that are going to be useful to you? I've been able to take some of them just in pieces. So if they have like a whole 45-minute activity built into one of these performance tasks, sometimes I've taken it out and sort of modified it so that my kids are using maybe some of the primary sources that come out of it, or they're engaging maybe in a discussion version of what is set up on AP Insight as an individual activity. It just kind of enriches the things that I've already got set up. On the other hand, if you don't have a bunch of lessons already ready to go, then this may be a good place to grab some more complete activities. Yeah, it looks like Amy is right with me on that. That's I'm coming to find definitely a way that I know I'm doing it right. So nice work, Amy. The documents are downloadable. You take them away. I've retyped some of them in some cases, but recognize that there is a teacher edition that has a sort of more thorough explanation there. So in case you need help being brilliant in front of the kids, this is a good way to grab somebody else's brilliance that I can use, which is nice. I have found that especially as the multiple choice exam has moved more and more toward stimulus-based questions, I've been trying really hard to build in more work with primary and secondary sources. So as Amy notes, like getting in, mining the performance tasks for good sources. Whoever they had setting these things up did a lot of work to go find sources that I haven't seen much anywhere else, which is nice because sometimes you get sort of like greatest hits of world history, and people get the same couple of quotes from the Quran or from the Bhagavad Gita or from the proclamations of Ashoka or things like that. And the performance tasks give maybe like a little more practice for kids, especially if you find that yours are struggling with that. This is a handy place to come back to. Then the assess. As I mentioned earlier, this is the place that I'm inclined to go most often to do things. So if you're inside the building blocks, then you've got a quiz for each one. If you're looking more broadly at the challenge area as a collection, then you've got these slightly longer challenge area assessments that involve more writing for you kids. Definitely make sure you've already got the content taught. You've done some kind of instruction and now you're checking how well do they know it. And then you can assign it. It's set up to allow you to assign it online. Sometimes I just like take the questions off and incorporate them separately into like an in-class paper and pencil assessment, things like that. That can be used whatever way works best for you. But especially if you don't have a large stable of existing questions or existing quizzes that you can use, this is a great place to go for that. When you're through and you've assessed in whatever ways you want to do, then the final set is the ACT resources. Now, maybe you and your students already have a backup follow-up plan and you already have a way you do that, but then if you want, then you have this whole set of how do you respond if kids don't get it? Where do they go next? How do they get some maybe additional practice with some of these particular skills? That's all available here in the ACT resources. So let's see. Right over here, we got these next steps guide. Like, what can you do? This is not perfect. Oh, so I got a comment here from Amy. Wait a few days before giving the quiz, yeah, to see if they actually know how to do it. There is that awkward way of doing it where you teach them for like 20 minutes and then you stop and assess them, and that mostly just checks for short term, can they spit it back at me? Giving them a day or so to kind of let it sink in and see if they've actually got it, that makes great sense to me. I like it. As far as ACT, the kind of next steps, what should we do? I don't, let's see how to put this. Insight supports a number of subject areas, and so I've had a chance to look at some of the like science-y ones. They tend to be a little more concrete links, like what exactly is it that you missed and what's exactly the thing that you can do. I think the histories are a little bit more difficult on that because there's so many interlocking things going on at once. If a kid missed one of my multiple choice questions, there might be a number of reasons why they missed it. So look at these next steps and see, like, are these things that will actually help your kids with what they're missing or not, and use the ones that work for you and not the ones that don't. You can actually give this stuff to kids for take home. That's especially handy if you're pressed for time in class and you want maybe to differentiate, you want to let some kids go work on their own and other kids don't have to, then you can sort it out that way. Certainly you know how to do this as a teacher generally. If you've got problems that the whole class has to deal with, then you know to come back in for the whole thing. Double check the full cycle. Prepare, teach, assess, act. Are these all things that you're ready to do? Do you have a sense of where you might want to have some support, where you might need to go into Insight and grab some resources versus where you can kind of let slide right now? It's probably useful in this activity, and also they do this sometimes in the Welcome PLC, so you might have experience of this. But if you just think about what are you about to teach next, what's the unit that you're about to start on next, Are you prepared, or are there things you want to look at on that end about student struggles? Do you have all the lesson resources you need, or are there some teach things that you would like to maybe go looking for? Do you have your assessments nailed down so that you'll be able to use them? And do you have a plan in place for, like, if kids don't get it, how you're going to loop back around? So if you've got something in place for all of those, then you're sort of free to browse. If you don't, then you want to be digging into one of those specifically. Eileen, I see your screen is white. That is not good. Fortunately, we're not showing you anything right now except the 4-part section with arrows between it that says prepare, teach, assess, act. You can go to your browser and check the AP Insight homepage, and you'll pretty much get the same thing as far as what we've got here. We're sort of at that point of the exercise where we're doing a little bit of discussion and share out. Eileen, is your whole screen white, or can you still at least see the chat? Because I can transfer some of this stuff over to the chat if it's possible for you to see that, even if you can't see the shared presentation. The discussion and share out, there's their slide to let me and you know that we're transitioning in case I don't have my notes here. But we have these like focus questions. So if you had used AP Insight already before, we'd be interested in what's most helpful for you and your students. It seems like probably Amy's the only one in here who's had much chance to play with that. Amy, you've been doing a great job of kind of sharing that as you go along, but if you got more of that sort of thing, by all means, we'd like to see it. Our other question is student misunderstandings or your own practice. Are there any things that you have come up with? They want to know based on your use of AP Insight, which again, if you haven't used it so much, then that's not quite so helpful. So I would say it's probably more useful for us to focus here on the question that I just asked you to think about, which is for your upcoming unit, whatever it is you're about to teach. Is there any place that you think you could maybe go into Insight and grab some resources? Are there any places where you think it's going to be particularly helpful for you, or that you're going to try to look for more resources? And then, of course, if you have any questions for me, now is a great time for that. We have sort of officially 15 minutes left in this thing, but I'll be happy to hang on longer than that. If you have questions about Insight, I'm here for that. If you have questions about the exam, anything that I know about that, I'll be happy to share that. And if you have questions about how the exam is scored, which is something I work with, I will be happy to answer questions there. Checks for understanding. Yes, that is good practice. I can remember, it's been a long time. I don't want to tell you how long, but I can remember when I was student teaching, getting that kind of instruction from my mentor teacher. Make sure you're checking for understanding all along, and like definitely I should build that into my lessons. And then things get away from me, and I don't really do that. So the fact that they're already built in to the performance tasks, as Amy notes, that's really good for somebody like me, if somebody forgets those things. Intentional, targeted, and specific. that they're letting the kids work. Yeah, I would agree with that. As I'm sure you've noticed over the course of the evening, I certainly am happy to hear myself talk. But if you don't have questions, I don't want to keep you. You don't have to feel obligated to make that happen. A couple of things that I'm seeing here in the chat. Then the webinar series. They're gonna try to do more of these as they go along. I don't know if they have scheduled topics for those in advance, but it would be basically this kind of thing, like we just did. So this one about collaboratively sharing ideas that you have for how to use the resources. That's one of them. If there were particular topics that you wanted to see in a webinar, if there's something you'd like more training on specifically, you would definitely want to email that to AP Insight. And let me type in that address. Email address at apinsight@collegeboard.org if there are things you want to see, but otherwise you would just check back in every once in a while and they'll post the topics in advance for what they want to do. Amy, to your question about the real world case studies, occasionally. I haven't used them very much. Have you had success with those? I'm making notes for myself. Period 3, you're faster than me. We're trying to close out period 2. I see what you did there. I'm pretty sure that everyone else in the room, Amy, has already noticed that you're a better teacher than me. So thank you for putting such a fine point on it. We've got it. I'm just teasing. You're doing well. Serena, I'm curious for a little more on what you're about to do with it tomorrow. Like how are you using it and sort of building it in? Yeah, I'm in the middle of Missouri, and we haven't had quite such a weather slam. I know people along the Gulf Coast have had a rough time. Sorry about that. Oh my goodness. I know that rushes things. That's pretty difficult to do. Hopefully you find these kind of helpful as you go. Yeah, I think pacing wise, you're in pretty good shape if you're getting started on period three. Uh, I usually do that for sort of like the second quarter ish of school is my period three time. There's lots of cool stuff going on there, and it really kind of is much bigger, like conceptually and in details than the earlier stuff. It's also a bigger chunk of the exam, but if we can do one, two, and three uh, before the semester break, then I usually feel like we're doing just about right. This is a point Amy makes that I struggle with a little bit. The students do have to know all the facts of history, right? All the content, but then they also have to know the historical reasoning kind of skills. The what some people are calling the four C's, right? How to do contextualization and causation and comparison and change over time stuff. So what I sometimes have tried to do is teach those skills in isolation, and it sort of eats up time to do that, and teach them how to do the long essay question rubrics separately, and teach them how to do those different thinking skills separately. And the performance tests do, or at least they can, when you can use them well, kind of build both those in at once and save a little bit of time that way. Oh, great! So that they're getting a little bit of chance to be expert in class on that tomorrow. I'm hoping that you have them research in their different cities and come in. That's wonderful. This is another thing with the activities that Insight has available. I'm glad you sort of brought up that idea of homework. I know different buildings have different policies, and districts handle that differently. And what do you have the kids do at home? Do you have them do nothing, or do you just have them read, or do you have them do some of these kind of activities? If you have the flexibility to assign some stuff at home, it can often make the in-class discussions a lot richer. So I think that's a great idea. Thanks for sharing that. As far as like sharing different ideas the way we're doing now, which is very absolutely definitely the goal of this exercise. If you want to continue and do more of that through AP Insight, they do have the kind of online community and discussion board. So if you go to the Share What Works page, that's how that would be accomplished. Um, of course, nobody's required to use that, but that's a place where you can do it. Also, a lot of people have success with the Facebook page for AP World History. There's a lot of good resources shared there, and there's always lots of people ready to respond if you have just general questions about how to teach or what to teach, or does anybody have a resource on this. That can be another place to go get lots of good material. It's a good point from Amy. If you do want to go log in and learn a little bit more, but you don't want to attend one of like the upcoming scheduled webinars, there are also the self-paced modules. You can, if you're like me, just go in and like play around with different pieces of it when you have a minute. That works well. If you'd rather get some instruction, then the self-paced modules are a really good way of doing that too. I do show us being right up against time. So I don't want to keep anybody here. I'll be here regardless for a while. So if you want to continue sharing, or if you have some other questions you want to ask about this or AP World History more generally, by all means, let's do that. But don't feel like you have to stick around. If you need to log out and go, you just go ahead and do that anytime. Self-evaluations. Um, if if a student is having a tough time in different parts of my class, try to do self-evaluation with them in a sort of like informal way first, and sort of see if they can identify some of the things that are working or not working for them. Um, which ones here are you asking about more specifically? Under the like act section, kind of next step sort of self-evals? At the start of the challenge area, I don't use them as much. Serena, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming. At the start of it, I don't use them as much because they they kind of start unevenly to me. So that like if you're going to be talking about some of these things in period one maybe, but period two maybe, then it's like there's no particular place where I would have them self evaluate those skills clearly, but instead usually like at the end of a unit, or if we hit a quiz, then they've got like a defined point where they can decide, oh yeah, that did or didn't work. You know what I mean? I don't know. It looks to me like our other guests have logged out. So of course, Amy, it's always a pleasure. And if you have other things you want to say or talk about, we can do that. But I think I'm going to go ahead